Ethan had not planned to stop that night. The highway outside Reno stretched for miles beneath steady rain, and the gas station coffee, sitting in the cup holder beside him, had already gone cold. His phone battery died 23 minutes before he reached the exit where he was supposed to turn. By then, he had been driving for almost 6 hours without music, without calling anyone, without any real destination beyond staying in motion. His apartment still smelled faintly like Lena's lavender shampoo, even 3 months after she moved out. A framed photograph of the two of them remained face down on the kitchen counter because he could not bring himself to throw it away, and could not bear to look at it either. People often imagine loneliness as dramatic and obvious, but for Ethan, it arrived quietly. It looked like unopened text messages. It looked like cereal eaten at midnight over the sink. It looked like sitting in the glow of a laptop screen until sunrise, because silence felt heavier once the room went dark. The building he found that night stood half a mile off the highway beside a line of pine trees and an old wooden fence with chipped white paint. A small sign near the gravel driveway read The Haven in hand-painted letters. Through the windows, he could see warm light, bookshelves, and people sitting together around a long table. Nothing about it resembled danger. One woman near the entrance wore a thick gray sweater and held a ceramic mug with both hands, as though trying to warm herself. Another man was washing dishes slowly, while someone else dried them with a towel. The atmosphere felt strangely calm, compared to the noise Ethan had been carrying inside his head for months. Clara answered the door before he even knocked. She was older than most of the others, maybe early 40s, with tired eyes that seemed practiced at listening. She noticed the rainwater on Ethan's jacket and stepped aside without hesitation. A kettle whistled somewhere deeper inside the building, while soft acoustic music played from an old speaker near the fireplace. At first, the place operated like many spiritual retreat groups scattered across the country. There were no immediate demands, no strange ceremonies, no dramatic declarations about the outside world. The conversations centered around exhaustion, modern loneliness, emotional honesty, and the need for human connection. People sat cross-legged on rugs with notebooks in their laps, while candles flickered beside stacks of worn paperbacks about meditation and self-discovery. Ethan noticed that nobody interrupted when another person spoke. Nobody glanced at a phone screen. Nobody rushed to offer advice. After months of shallow conversations and carefully filtered social media versions of intimacy, the attention felt almost shocking. One young woman described losing contact with her family after moving across the country. A man with graying hair admitted he had not spoken honestly to another human being in years. Ethan listened quietly at first, turning a chipped mug in his hands while rain tapped steadily against the windows behind him. By midnight, he had started talking too. He spoke about Lena before he realized he was going to. He spoke about the way she used to read beside him on the couch, with her feet tucked underneath a blanket. He spoke about the final argument they had in the kitchen, while an untouched dinner sat growing cold between them. According to Ethan, the worst part was not that she left. It was the sentence she said before closing the apartment door behind her. She told him she no longer knew how to reach him. The group listened carefully while he spoke. Clara rested her elbows lightly against the table and maintained eye contact without looking away once. Another member named Daniel slid a box of tissues closer to Ethan without interrupting him. That level of attention can feel deeply meaningful to someone who has gone months feeling emotionally invisible. The danger was not hidden in cruelty. The danger existed inside relief. Ethan left the gathering around 2 in the morning and sat inside his car for several minutes staring at the steering wheel while rainwater rolled down the windshield in uneven lines. The next morning, he returned only to thank them before leaving town. At least that was what he told himself while walking back toward the building, carrying a paper bag of pastries from a nearby gas station. Inside, several members were preparing breakfast together. Someone chopped vegetables near the sink while another person folded blankets from the previous night's meeting. Clara greeted Ethan by name immediately, a small detail that affected him more than it should have. There is a particular ache that develops when a person begins believing they are forgettable. Being remembered can feel like medicine. Ethan stayed for breakfast, then meditation afterward. The meditation itself was simple. Everyone sat silently in a dim room while morning light passed slowly across the wooden floorboards. For the first time in weeks, Ethan stopped checking the clock. He stopped thinking about the apartment waiting for him several states away. He stopped imagining Lena opening her new life somewhere without him inside it. When the session ended, Clara asked whether he planned on driving all night again. Ethan hesitated before answering. Before we go any further, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to hear from you. And do not forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. 1 extra day became 3, 3 became 8. The routines inside the Haven were comforting in ways Ethan had not expected. Mornings began with tea and silence. Afternoons involved gardening, repairing furniture, or preparing communal meals together. At night, the group gathered in the basement beneath strings of soft yellow lights to discuss fear, identity, grief, and attachment. Ethan noticed how carefully the members spoke to one another. Even disagreements were framed gently, almost therapeutically. Yet subtle changes slowly appeared around him. Phones were discouraged during gatherings because they supposedly distracted people from genuine connection. Members rarely spoke to outsiders unless necessary. One woman named Rachel apologized repeatedly after mentioning she missed her younger sister. Clara responded calmly but firmly, asking whether nostalgia sometimes prevented people from becoming who they were meant to become. Nobody argued with her. Ethan observed these moments quietly, while pretending not to notice the tension that followed them. One evening, he reached instinctively for his car keys during dinner and realized Clara had placed them in a drawer earlier, so he could finally rest. Real control rarely announces itself loudly. It arrives disguised as care. Ethan accepted the explanation because part of him wanted someone else making decisions for a while. The exhaustion he carried had become larger than simple heartbreak. It affected the way he moved through rooms, the way he stared at supermarket shelves without buying anything, the way he ignored phone calls from old friends, because conversation required energy he no longer possessed. At the Haven, every uncertainty seemed to have an answer waiting for it. Clara often spoke about emotional surrender, while standing near the basement staircase, with her hands folded loosely in front of her. She described modern life as spiritually empty and emotionally disconnected. She claimed people remained unhappy because they kept clinging to identities built around fear. Ethan wrote many of these thoughts into a black notebook he carried everywhere. Looking back later, he realized the notebook slowly transformed from a journal into something closer to permission. Each entry moved him further away from questioning the group and closer toward needing it. The confession sessions began during Ethan's second week there. Members sat in a circle beneath dim basement lights while one person at a time admitted private fears or painful memories. Nobody reacted dramatically. They simply listened while the speaker emptied pieces of themselves into the room. One night, a young man described losing custody of his daughter after years of addiction. Another woman admitted she still checked the obituary pages every morning because she could not fully accept her mother's death. When Ethan's turn arrived, he stared at the concrete floor for several seconds before speaking. He confessed how relieved he felt after arriving at the Haven and how frightening that relief had become. Clara listened carefully before telling him that most people spent their entire lives searching for a place where they could finally stop pretending. Several members nodded slowly while candles flickered along the walls. Ethan remembered feeling understood in that moment. But understanding can become dangerous when it begins replacing independence. After the session ended, Clara hugged him, while whispering that fear was often the final barrier before transformation. The first genuine crack appeared late one night, when Ethan attempted to call Marcus, an old college friend who had left 6 voicemails over the previous week. Ethan stood inside the upstairs bathroom, holding his phone near the small frosted window, searching for signal, while the hallway outside remained completely silent. He evidently managed to send a short text message saying he was safe and would explain everything soon. Seconds later, there was a soft knock at the bathroom door. Clara's voice asked whether he was all right. Ethan opened the door to find her standing calmly in the hallway, wearing slippers and holding a folded blanket against her chest. She did not appear angry. That almost made the moment worse. She asked why he felt the need to reach outside the community instead of leaning on the people already supporting him. Ethan tried explaining that Marcus was worried, but Clara only tilted her head slightly and asked whether old relationships sometimes kept people trapped inside previous versions of themselves. Ethan did not answer immediately. For the first time since arriving, he felt watched. After that conversation, ordinary interactions inside the Haven began feeling subtly different. Members still smiled warmly, but the warmth carried expectation underneath it. During meals, conversations often drifted toward loyalty, trust, and emotional weakness. Clara spoke frequently about how the outside world trained people to abandon one another the moment discomfort appeared. Ethan noticed how often members repeated her phrasing almost word for word. One afternoon, he entered the basement early and discovered a stack of journals left beside an old filing cabinet. Curiosity led him to open one. The entries belonged to former members describing guilt after leaving the group, confusion about their own memories, and an overwhelming fear of returning to ordinary life. Several pages had water stains where tears had blurred the ink. One final entry near the back of a journal stopped Ethan cold. The writer described feeling unable to make simple decisions without Clara's approval. The sentence ended abruptly halfway across the page, as though interrupted. Ethan closed the notebook immediately and sat motionless beside the cabinet, listening to the furnace hum beneath the floorboards. That night, Clara announced what she called a surrender session. The gathering took place in the basement after midnight, with only candlelight illuminating the room. Ethan sat in a folding chair while the others formed a loose circle around him. Clara spoke quietly about identity and emotional pain, pacing slowly across the concrete floor, while shadows moved along the walls behind her. She asked Ethan who he believed himself to be without heartbreak, without loneliness, without the stories he repeated about being abandoned. At first, the question sounded philosophical, almost compassionate. But as the conversation continued, Ethan realized every answer he offered was being carefully dismantled. When he mentioned wanting independence, Clara described independence as fear disguised as strength. When he mentioned leaving eventually, another member asked why he was so eager to return to a life that had already left him miserable. Ethan looked around the room and noticed how intensely everyone watched him. Some appeared concerned. Others looked almost hopeful. For a brief moment, he understood how easily a person could surrender control simply to end the pressure of being examined so completely. Ethan later described the most frightening part of that night as the moment he nearly stayed. He nearly accepted Clara's version of reality because resisting it required energy he was no longer certain he possessed. Loneliness changes the architecture of a person slowly. It lowers standards. It confuses dependence with intimacy. Sitting in that basement, Ethan realized the group had not trapped him through violence or threats. They had studied his exhaustion carefully and built an emotional world around it. The realization arrived physically before it became intellectual. His chest tightened. His hands shook against his knees. He noticed the basement door behind Clara and understood he had started measuring rooms by how difficult they would be to escape. Clara eventually told him that if he still wished to leave afterward, nobody would stop him. Yet the room itself contradicted the statement. The silence carried expectation. The eyes surrounding him carried expectation. Even kindness carried expectation. Ethan smiled weakly during the closing prayer, because he understood something important then. Survival sometimes depends on appearing convinced. At 4:13 the next morning, Ethan walked barefoot down the hallway toward the kitchen, where Clara kept members' keys inside a ceramic bowl beside the refrigerator. The house remained silent, except for rain hitting the gutters outside. A yellow light above the stove cast long shadows across the floor while the refrigerator motor hummed steadily in the corner. Ethan moved slowly enough to avoid creaking boards, pausing every few steps to listen. He found his keys exactly where Clara had left them. For several seconds he stood motionless, holding them tightly in his fist, while staring at a handwritten grocery list attached to the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a sunflower. Ordinary details often remain painfully vivid after frightening experiences. Ethan remembered that magnet years later more clearly than some faces. As he reached the front door, footsteps sounded upstairs. He froze immediately. Clara appeared at the top of the staircase wearing the same gray sweater from the night they first met. She did not shout. She simply watched him quietly from the darkness above. Ethan expected anger, confrontation, perhaps even people blocking the exit behind him. None of that happened. Clara rested one hand lightly against the staircase railing while rain blew against the porch outside. She told him the world would hurt him again eventually. And when it did, he would remember that the Haven had tried to offer him peace. Ethan said nothing in return. He stepped outside, crossed the gravel driveway, and drove away before sunrise reached the mountains. During the first hour on the road, he checked the rearview mirror, constantly expecting headlights behind him. None appeared. The silence afterward felt strangely complicated. Part of him felt relieved beyond words. Another part felt grief. That confusion embarrassed him for years, because he believed escape should have felt cleaner. Instead, he missed the communal dinners sometimes. He missed the certainty. He missed the feeling of being noticed every time he entered a room. Recovery required admitting that harmful places can still contain moments that feel emotionally real to the people inside them. Months later, Ethan began attending therapy sessions twice each week in a small office above a bookstore. During one appointment, he described how embarrassed he felt for almost staying. The therapist asked him a question that changed the way he understood the entire experience. She asked what exactly had existed in his life before the Haven appeared. Ethan thought about the apartment with unopened curtains. He thought about the ignored voicemails from friends. He thought about eating dinner alone beside the blue glow of his computer screen, night after night. Groups like the Haven do not usually begin by taking freedom away. They begin by offering relief. That is why stories like Ethan's matter, beyond the specifics of one isolated community hidden off a highway in Nevada. The need to belong sits at the center of almost every human life. Under the right circumstances, that need can overpower caution, intelligence, pride, and even fear itself. Ethan eventually rebuilt relationships he had neglected. He started answering phone calls again. He learned how to sit alone in a room without immediately needing to escape himself. Years later, one object still remained in Ethan's apartment from that period of his life. The black notebook he carried through the Haven sat inside a drawer, beneath old tax documents and instruction manuals. He rarely opened it, but he never threw it away either. Some pages contained manipulative language copied directly from Clara's talks. Other pages held painfully honest reflections about loneliness, grief, and the desire to disappear into something larger than himself. The notebook became evidence of two truths existing side by side. The first truth was that Ethan had encountered a deeply controlling environment capable of consuming vulnerable people slowly. The second truth was more uncomfortable. Before arriving there, he had already been disappearing quietly in his own life. The Haven simply recognized it before anyone else did. That is what makes stories like this difficult, to reduce into simple categories of victim and villain. Human beings rarely walk into dangerous places because they are foolish. More often, they walk in because someone finally notices they are hurting. And sometimes, that is all it takes.